last time we finished, we finished milling out the lumber, and we're left with a nice profile of a frame here that's, you know, to hold glass, hold matting, or simply just hold a canvas. And it looks like this. We got that profile shape on the edge there, and we're ready to go with cutting frames. So now we're going to cut frames for our artworks. All right. This is an art print, and art prints usually have signatures at the bottom of them. They're usually not printed to the edge of the paper. If you're talking about a photograph, photographs are usually printed to the edge of the paper. These usually have a border around them with a signature on them. And standardly, how you want to mat those pictures is it's better to mat it with leaving a blank space around the outside of the image of 1/4 inch and 1/4 inch at the bottom, and that allows the signature to be seen in the mat. So when I measure this, I'm going to measure that, adding that included. All right, so my total measurement, this image is 8 by 10 inches. My total measurement is 8.5 by 10.5 inches, and that's for image size. Because I'm going to stick a mat on this, it's standard practice to leave about a 3-inch border around the edge of the picture. Somewhere about that, some a little less, some a little more. But I'm going to add 3 inches to the top, bottom, and sides. So when I do that, I add 6 inches to the dimension. 3 plus 3 is 6, and I end up with 14.5 by 16.5 inches. And that's how big I have to make the frame. All right, generally speaking. For this is a canvas, and when you're measuring a canvas, you want to make sure that you measure all 4 sides specifically to make sure they're exact. If you don't do that, because canvases sometimes when they're stretched, the fabric wrapping around the edges of the canvas can make it a little bit thicker or wider than what you would expect it to be. So if you go measuring just one side, you may find that another side's a little bit bigger depending on how they wrapped it. Also, if you're assuming this is 12 inches, because the frame is, you've got to account for the thickness of the canvas. So when I measure this actual frame, it comes out to just about 12 inches. It's 12 and a hair, not even a half of a 16th. So we're right there. 12 there we're about 12 and a 16th, and there we're about maybe 12 and a 16th, and like I said, this last one was about 12. All right, so we can get around, I think we'll be safe with 12 inches. I'll tell you why in a second. Let's go over and measure the frames. All right. So I got my frame molding all here set out that I want to cut. It's all this raw molding that you see here, and this is what I'm going to cut into frames. First thing to do, if you're doing multiple pieces or multiple sticks, chop your first 45-degree angle on the chop saw first. All right. So every one of these pieces, I set my miter saw here, also known as chop saw, at 45 degrees to the right. And how you cut a frame is you rest the inside lip against the fencing. So it's always cut this way. Why? Because even in sometimes the moldings may be fancy moldings in a frame shop, and they may have a different irregular shape to the outside of the frame. This one doesn't, but you know, the outer edge of the frame could be irregularly shaped, whereas this inside edge is always guaranteed to be straight across. All right, and standardly the depth of frames, by the way, I mentioned before, are either 1/4 inch depth or 3/8 inch depth. That's not going to matter in my measurements when I measure this. All right, but first, before you measure anything, you want to chop all the first angles on the frame. So I'll chop the first angle on the end of the frame, and then I'll be ready to measure it. All right. So basically, little tips about the saw itself. The miter saw, it says keep your hands back away from the blade that far. Always wear safety glasses. These are mine. When you're cutting this way, you want to use your right hand to cut with and your left hand to hold your molding with. All right. And then when you're cutting, I had already pre-cut these, but just going through it for you. You'll turn the machine on while the blade's at the full height of it, plunge through the wood, and then release the trigger on the machine, allowing the blade to come to a complete stop before raising back up. If you don't do that, that end piece that you cut off may fly up, and oftentimes it likes to target you in the face or fly out that way and hit somebody else. All right, so that's important for technique. All right, but so I've already chopped this end here, so now I can measure it. So when you're measuring, you want to lay a ruler on the inside of the frame, and that's what we're measuring. When we actually took our measurements, it was for the inside of the frame. For example, I'm going to measure for 16.5 inches. All right, so I'll lay my ruler very close to the edge here, where the first chopped edge is, right there, and have it lined with that inside edge right there. And like I said, not out on the lip, but on the inside. I'll measure that out to 16.5. Then I'm going to add 1/8 of an inch to my measurement. All right. Standard frames are not exact measurements. They are 1/8 bigger. Even if you purchased a ready-made frame, when you actually measure the inside of the frame, you'll find out that it's not, for example, 12 by 16 inches. It's actually 12.1/8 by 16.1/8 inch. Why is that? So you can actually put your mat, your backing, and your artwork all into the frame easily. So it all sort of drops in place. The same with the canvas in this case. That canvas was slightly over 12 inches when I measured it, but this 1/8 of an inch will account for that. So it's going to be 12.1/8 inch when I cut the frame for that. Right now I'm working on the print, so we want to measure for 5/8 instead of 16.5. Okay, so I put a little pencil mark on the inside there, and that's what I'm going to chop to. Here's the trick, though. When you're cutting it this way, you won't be able to see that pencil mark, would you? So you sort of have to factor in your 45-degree angle. First thing, switch angles on the saw, just like that. And how I do it nowadays is I sort of eyeball where I put my mark and make sure that it doesn't cross the blade path. This is the path that the blade could be in. More specifically, it's going to be in the center of this open line. So what I'll do is I'll lay the frame molding down and I'll turn it up gradually, and this usually gets me to about with it. The worst thing you want to do is chop it smaller, because when you chop it smaller by accident, you can't go back. Here we go. I'm going to make my first chop, and I'm leaving the vacuum off just for
video
demonstration
purposes.
Yeah. And that's how you chop it nice and clean and safely. All right, now I over chopped by quite a bit there. Looks like to be about an inch. All right, so then I'll just chop it till I get closer to that edge. Without chopping over. So now I'm going to take it to about here. Move it in 1/2 an inch. All right, now we're in one, now I'm about 1/2 an inch away from it. The reason I do it safely and incrementally is because I don't want to overcut. It takes only one chop to mess it up. A little bit more, bring the blade down. That. All right, and I'm where I want to be. I am now just about 1 blade depth away from that mark. All right, so you bring the blade down, and a blade depth is actually not the blade, it's the thickness of the blade itself. Which they call that depth the kerf, for technical terms, but the thickness, it's the thickness of the blade plus the thickness of the teeth. The teeth are actually just slightly wider than the blade. It's about 1/8 of an inch. All right, so when I do that, I want to make sure that the teeth are down to the wood before I do my chop. Here we go. And we are spot on. See that? Right there's my mark, right there's my cut. All right. Now that I have that one side cut, you need to cut four sides for it. We have two that are 6.5 inch, and we have two that are 16.5 inch. Then we have two that are 14.5 inch. All right. But for the second one, I can use the guides on the saw here. These supports that extend out beyond the saw itself have these. They're adjustable. Too tightened on there. All right, so these not only support longer wood pieces, but they also support as a stop. All right, so you set this up, move this black thing over here, like the stop, and you can slide this back and forth. All right, and I'm going to utilize that to cut my second side out. That way, I don't have to measure each time and just make guesstimate chops on it. All right, so what you do is you bring the saw blade down, and you bring the wood right up to the edge of the saw blade. I'm making sure that the teeth are passing within that, at least one tooth, therefore I know exactly where it should be. All right, because remember the tooth sticks out further than the blade. Once I have it like that, then I just slide this in a little bit and tighten it up. All right, now any piece of wood I stick in there will actually be cut the same size. So the next one I have to cut. Yeah, I'm going to use this stick. And this one was already, so if you're working with one piece, you'll have to shift it back to 45 this way and cut that angle on it first, and then shift it back to this position to cut that angle. But since I had them all chopped and all of my frame molding is about the same, I can work with this one, this next one. So I'll just rest that in there up against that edge. Now I'm cutting with my left hand. All right, you never want to, and I know sometimes it's natural for the first time for a person using this saw to do this, but when you're doing this, you can see how now my arm crosses the path of the blade, you know, and so that's very dangerous to do. So in reality, you take your non-dominant hand, well in my case because I'm right-handed, and I use that to control the saw blade from this side, all right? I don't worry about too much about the wood on the other end. I should have extended that out because I could, and then this piece of wood wouldn't have fell, but I would have let the wood fall away from the machine before grabbing hold of that wood while I was in the middle of chopping. All right, so there we go. That's how we cut our second piece. And if you rest these pieces together like this, you can double check them back to back and see that they're exactly the same size. All right. So once you have your other two pieces chopped, you're ready to put together your frame. Let's come over here and put one together. Like I said, in this demonstration, I've been using different frames. I've been using recycled wood frames from larger damaged frames. And that's in the case, that's what I'm going to be putting together right here. All right, so the first thing you do is you get your you lay your frame out on your table. Like that. And once you have your frame out, laid out just the way it's going to go, you'll definitely know that you cut your angles right if your frame goes together just like this with your lip on the inside of the frame. Yeah, like I said, you can use ready-made frames and break them down. What I did that in this case. This was a larger frame before this, and I broke all the corners out, removed all the nails, and chopped new angles on them, chopped 45s on it to make a smaller frame. All right. Then we're going to use these. These are called this is not just any old ratchet strap. It looks like a ratchet strap. These are called endless ratchet straps. Why? Because they don't have a hook on the end like standard ones do. Regular ratchet straps have a hook on the end. This one is endless. And so that's what you want to get from the hardware store. They cost about $6 a piece, or we got a 4-pack from Amazon. And these ones are all really pretty long, and so you can, because they're so long, you can do big frames with these, put together big frames. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all 4 sides together at once. All right. Standard traditional frame shops, like the one I've used that I started in, actually have a vise, and it's a 90-degree angle vise that mounts to the table, and you actually just would glue and put two sides of a frame together once. You usually have a vise on one end of the table and a vise on the other to do the two halves, and then you put the two halves together with one vise. This way you can do the frame all at once. It saves time in waiting for the glue to dry for every corner. It's sort of a clever method. Now this isn't the most professional method, because sometimes if you're working with fancier molding frames like this one, this will, if you're not careful, it will crush the corners on your frame. They also have ratchet straps just like this that actually have 90-degree plastic corner grips on them. Oh, I forgot to show you, because I'm telling you about them. How to use the ratchet strap is you want to feel down the end of the strap that's attached to the ratchet, and you feel it down all the way to the end to get the same side around on it. And you'll see how it fits around the frame evenly without being twisted. And then I feed the the strap through the center of this cylinder, you could call it, and out the back. The front is the face that faces the frame. It's also the smooth side of the ratchet strap, right? And once I get that fed through there, then I throw the strap around the frame just like so. And once I have it around, I'll go and make sure the strap isn't twisted. Ideally, it's straight and not twisted. I think I didn't do it quite. Didn't do it right, and it is twisted, but because this is a larger frame, I don't have to worry about it as much. All right, and so then you pull on this little trigger thing on the ratchet itself, and it releases the ratchet to be able to crank up and crank tight. All right, so I'm going to tighten it up just a little bit, not fully. And you can see it's tightened up all the way, and this is what I was talking about, twisting right here. I needed to take the strap off and make sure I got the right side on, but I didn't, and it twisted. Not a big deal though, because of the frame being so big. If you have a smaller frame, that might really get in the way of being twisted. All right, and then we put some wood glue on there. This is just standard wood glue. This happened to be Type Bond brand, which is pretty standard as well. You don't need anything special. All right, but what you want to do is you want to take one of the moldings from the frame, and you spread around the wood glue like that. You want to make sure that there's wood glue on covering the entire edge of that frame. All right, and I'll do the same thing with this side. Just like that. You end up with a glue finger. But anyway, you can actually use that end glue for the next side then. So you keep that finger carefully. Again, got to spread around this edge. And you want to work kind of quickly. The glue does set up very slowly, but you don't want to mess around and take a break or something in between gluing up all four sides. Get them all glued up before you take a break, and get those straps on. Alrighty, there we go, all four sides together. Okay, now I'm going to take a moment to wipe the finger off. There we go. And I'm making sure the frame is laying on a flat surface, and I'm going to start cranking up on the tension of the ratchet strap. All right, as I'm doing that, I'm checking each corner, making sure that it's aligned perfectly. There is a chance, like in this case, the molding is slightly different heights, and it's natural. It depends on if they cut it from the same piece or not. There's a slight irregularity to it. There, we got that one down, and this one looks to be pretty straight. this one too. All right. And no matter whether or not you cut, once I get this tightened up on here, just like that, it applies pressure to all four corners, really pushing that in. You may get a little glue that oozes out of there. You can carefully wipe that off quickly with a paper towel while it's still wet. If you leave it to dry on there, it's really difficult to get off of there. A lot of people are like, heck, I'll just sand it off or whatever. In this case, I certainly can't sand this frame because it was already finished. All right, so you gotta get the glue out of that area there. Did it. And then you let it set to dry for 20 minutes. Yeah, 20 minutes is the standard time when it's safe to actually take the straps off. All right, I'm gonna set this one aside and bring out the finished one. Just like this. So after 20 minutes, this is what you've got. You've got a glued together frame, all right? Now, if this was a smaller frame, say for this picture right here, I don't actually do anything else to the frames besides sand them and maybe finish them once they're all put together. I won't put nails in the frame. Why is that? Because in my experience, smaller frames, first of all, they're not as heavy as larger frames because they're not supporting. In that case, the only thing this frame is supporting is this canvas, which is very lightweight. So I don't have to worry about, over time, the frame coming apart as much. And if it's a small picture with glass, a lot of times because I'm an artist, I'm framing with plexiglass instead of glass because I have to ship them away to shows. Those frames are also pretty lightweight, so I don't worry about putting nails in. I found that when I break apart a frame, once the glue is dry, most of the time the corners actually break out of the frame, therefore proving that the glue is actually stronger than the wood itself. So for the most cases that works really well, but on larger frames I will put nails in them, and the standard nails that we use are not actually nails at all. They call them brads. The difference between a nail and a brad is the fact that nails have flat heads on the ends, and wire brads actually just have a very small head on the end of it. All right, we're going to take one, and we're going to pre-drill our holes in our frame. So how do we do that? We take one of our wire brads, and these are 1-inch wire brads. They're 18 gauge, and that's the thickness of it. I snip the end off with a pair of wire cutters, way over there somewhere, and I've got myself a drill bit. All right, as long as your drill chuck on the drill you're using actually goes in, can tighten around this little bit, you can use a wire brad nail as a drill bit itself, and you don't actually need a drill bit, which is very nice. All right, I'm not 100% sure whether this picture is vertical or horizontal. More than likely it's probably a vertical picture. The reason being is because I don't know what's going in this picture frame yet. But so if it's vertical, you want to put one nail hole in the side, the vertical sides, the longer side, and then 2 nail holes in the top. Therefore you only see one nail hole, or only have to cover up one nail hole on the sides. All right. If it was horizontal, I'd be putting 1 in the sides and 2 in the top and the bottom. All right, so here's how we do it. I'm going to put 2 in this top and bottom. You'll put 1 up towards the top, 1 down towards the bottom, and you usually stagger them a little bit because the wood and the frame can split if they're sort of in a parallel line to each other. Gives it more of an opportunity to do that. And then 1 on the side. And the 1 on the side goes in the center. All right, so just like that, I've got 1 on the side in the center, and I've got 2, 1 on the top and 1 towards the bottom. And you can see why, because that 1 on the side, you don't want it to cross paths with the other 2. All right, so then we grab a wire brad nails, and we stick them in here in the holes. All right, this makes nailing easy. The reason you always want to pre-drill your holes is because of splits. Splits happen when you don't pre-drill your holes, and they happen more frequently than people think not. All right, I need to grab myself a hammer real quick. Okay, so how I hammer them, I usually put them right on the table like this, and it's pretty tall, but I can reach it, and I sink those nails down. Before I get to the frame, I actually use this, which is a nail set. That's what they call it. And how you do this carefully without pinching your own finger is you rest your finger right up against the edge of the nail set, like that, the end of it, and the nail. And this does take a little practice, but after a while you get good at it. By having my finger rested up there tightly, I know that my finger is not being pinched by the nail or the nail set. Oops, I missed it a little bit. Don't get old. There we go. All right, so that one sunk in. And that one too. Just like that. Very quickly and easily. And you can notice this looks simple. It may be a little difficult the first time you do it. Try not to make a mistake. If you do sink in beside the nail, you're going to be filling the nail holes in with putty. Look at that, down in there. All right, so once you're finished nailing in all four sides, you will fill the nail holes with putty. You could use rub and buff. You could use acrylic. You can match the color. If I have gold acrylic, I can fill that in and wipe it off clean. I also use what the professional framers use is a putty. It's a non-drying oil-based putty that they mix the colors together with a little popsicle stick, and they fill in the holes with that kind of stuff. It never dries, but in reality, it doesn't come out either. Also, you can use Sculpey clay, or there's an oil-based clay that I like to use, plastiline clay, for regular raw wood frames because it happens to be the same color as the wood. That's it.